I heard you want a wife. My daughter is perfect for you, said the Apache woman I helped. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you were watching from. The Texas frontier was gripped by winter's cold, not just the kind that bit fingers and toes, but the kind that made men quieter, more deliberate. Frost lay over the dirt trail like crushed glass, and the wind sliced between the tall pine trees. Calder Vance moved slowly, his coat drawn tight, gloved hands tucked under his arms. He didn't rush anywhere these days, not since he'd buried his fiancée years ago, her absence leaving no appetite for town, no interest in company, no room for anything that could be taken away again. He lived alone at the edge of the timberline in a one-room cabin he'd built with his own hands, hauling stone and timber until his back nearly gave out. His only companions were a mule named Slate, two hens, and silence. That morning, like most, he'd gone down the road to check the trap lines and gather wood. He didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. But as he rounded a bend near the split in the road, something caught his eye just off the trail, lying beside a patch of brush. A figure. He slowed, stopped. At first, he thought it might be a pile of rags or a drunk who hadn't made it home from some campfire the night before. But when he moved closer, his stomach clenched. It was a woman old, Apache, hunched over, one arm wrapped around a tattered bundle of belongings, the other limp at her side. Her hair, streaked with gray, was tied with thin strips of leather, but the wind had loosened most of it. Her skin was dry and cracked, her eyes were open, sunken, but alert. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. Calder crouched down, his knee aching as it always did in the cold, and looked at her closely. She was alive. Barely. Her lips were split, her fingers purple and swollen from exposure. He could see where her cloak had been torn and roughly sewn together with mismatched thread. She chest piece. She had no weapon, no shoes, nothing but the bundle and the frost forming on her lashes. Calder hesitated. His breath came out in clouds. He felt the familiar pull in his gut, the one that said, stay out of it. That said, don't bring someone else's burden home. He'd listened to that voice for years now, but something about the way she looked at him, calm, proud, not begging, cut through his hesitation. He stood and walked back to Slate, pulled the saddle blanket off the mule, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he lifted her, careful and slow. She was lighter than she should have been, bones sharp under skin. She didn't resist. Calder walked beside the mule, steadying her with one hand while guiding the reins with the other. He didn't speak, neither did she. They walked past the trees, across the frozen stream bed, and up toward the edge of the settlement, a scattered group of cabins, some tents, a closed-down trading post, and a crooked wooden sign that used to say Creek Junction, before the wind took half the letters. It wasn't a town anyone came to for hope. Halfway up the last hill, the woman stumbled. Calder caught her under the elbow. She stayed against him a moment, then pushed herself upright. He didn't offer more than she asked for. His mind turned over questions. Who was she? Where was she going? Why was she alone? But he didn't ask. If she wanted to talk, she would. If not, it wasn't his place to force it. When they reached the settlement outskirts, Calder turned toward the direction of the bunkhouses, figuring maybe she had family in the worker camps. Maybe someone would take her in. But then she stopped. She didn't lean or sway. She stood there, still wrapped in his blanket, and turned to face him. Her voice, when it came, was rough but clear. I heard you wanted a wife. My daughter is perfect for you. Calder blinked. He didn't know what to say. His first reaction was confusion, then a spike of unease. Was this a trick? A setup? Some desperate barter? But she looked at him like she wasn't joking, wasn't desperate, wasn't even hopeful. Just certain. Before he could answer, the old woman brought two fingers to her lips and gave a sharp whistle. The sound echoed across the trees. From the tree line, maybe 20 paces back, a second figure stepped into view. Younger, barefoot. Calder's breath caught. She came forward slowly, like someone used to being watched, her body moving with the stiffness of cold and weariness. She wore a low-cut deerskin dress, worn to near rags at the edges, its decorative fringe clinging to her thighs with each step. Her hips swayed slightly as she walked, though it wasn't deliberate. Her figure was striking, curves that would draw attention in any town, though Calder could see from her guarded posture that she hated the attention it usually brought. Her hair was dark, thick, braided down both sides, decorated with small feathers and leather strings. Her face held no smile, no invitation, just a calm, measured gaze. Her skin had the smooth bronze tone of her people, but patches were red from the cold. Her chest rose and fell in slow, heavy breaths. Her lips were dry and chapped. She stopped beside her mother without a word. Calder didn't know what to think. His guard was up, but part of him couldn't ignore the quiet desperation in the girl's eyes. Not the desperation of someone looking for a man, but the look of someone who'd run out of safe places to sleep. The mother turned toward him again. "We were cast out," she said. "Too much jealousy, too much shame. My daughter is strong. She can cook. She can work. She needs safety." Calder's thoughts scrambled. He looked at the girl, young, proud, trying not to look cold, not to look frightened. She met his eyes, then lowered them. He swallowed hard. His mouth was dry. He looked at the sky, then at the trail, then at Slate. He didn't have room for people, didn't have patience for strangers. But the old woman had said one thing right. He wasn't cruel. This wasn't about pity. It was about choice. She hadn't begged. She'd made an offer. The girl hadn't spoken at all. Still, he couldn't walk away. Without a word, Calder turned and started walking back toward his cabin. After a beat, the girl followed, then the mother. He didn't look back, but he felt it in his chest. Something was starting, and it wasn't going away. The walk back to Calder's cabin took close to an hour. He didn't speak during the journey, and neither did they. The old woman walked slowly, leaning on the mule for support, her hand gripping the edge of the saddle blanket, still draped around her shoulders. The younger woman, Sona, though he hadn't asked her name yet, walked behind him, silent, steady, eyes cast forward but watchful. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask anything. Calder kept his pace even, aware of every sound. Their boots crunching on frozen dirt, the groan of trees in the wind, the steady creak of the mule's bridle. He'd spent years alone and didn't like people walking behind him, but he kept his thoughts to himself. When they reached the edge of the ridge overlooking his land, he stopped. Below, the slope flattened into a small clearing. His cabin stood plain and squat among tall pines, a short fence around the chicken coop, a shed near the corral, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. The place wasn't much, but it was solid. It had kept him alive through 5 winters. He'd built it after everything fell apart. After Elizabeth died of fever and the wedding dress stayed in a trunk no one ever opened again. He turned to the women. They didn't look impressed, just tired. He led them down the slope. The cabin's door creaked as he pushed it open. Warmth hit them from the fire still smoldering in the hearth. He stepped aside and let them enter first. The old woman stepped in and stood near the wall, breathing deeply as if the smell of wood smoke meant safety. Sona paused at the threshold, then crossed the room without hesitation. She went straight to the hearth and knelt beside it, holding her hands out to the heat. Her shoulders trembled as the warmth hit her skin. Calder watched them both closely. He pulled off his gloves, hung his coat on the hook, and stepped inside. He cleared his throat. "There's stew," he said. His voice sounded louder than he meant it to. He didn't speak much anymore, and it always startled him when he did. He crossed to the stove, grabbed 2 bowls, and ladled out what was left from the morning: rabbit, carrots, and barley. He handed the bowls to the women without ceremony. They took them quietly. The old woman ate slowly with dignity, blowing each spoonful to cool it. Sona ate faster, careful not to spill, but hungry. Her eyes stayed lowered, but he could see the tension in her jaw as she chewed. She was trying not to appear desperate. He poured himself a bowl, then sat near the table, watching the flames in the hearth. For a while, no one spoke. After they ate, Calder pulled spare bedding from the storage chest. He laid out extra blankets and a thin mattress near the fire. It wasn't much, but it was warmer than the shed or the ground. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. The old woman nodded. Sona didn't look up, but he could tell she'd heard. Later, as night fell and wind pressed against the windows, Calder sat in his corner chair and watched them from the shadows. Sona had taken off her outer wrap and draped it near the fire to dry. Beneath it, the torn deerskin dress clung to her body, revealing skin along her hips, thighs, in the curve of her chest where the neckline had split. She didn't seem ashamed, just resigned. He noticed the bruises then, faint but there on her upper arm, near her ribs. Someone had put hands on her. He didn't ask who, not yet. Sona helped her mother lie down, tucking the blanket close to her frail shoulders. Then, without a word, she took the other side of the mattress and curled up facing the fire. Calder looked at them both and felt something settle in his chest. Responsibility. He hadn't asked for it, but it was there now, thick as blood. Before he banked the fire for the night, he turned and finally asked, "What's your name?" The old woman answered, "Sona," she said. "Her name is Sona." "And you?" The woman hesitated. "They call me Adai. It doesn't matter now." Calder gave a slow nod. He didn't press for more. That night he lay on his bed with the fire crackling low, staring at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the soft breathing of two strangers in his home. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something had changed. He felt it. She was here and she wasn't leaving. Morning came without sound. No roosters, no wagons, no voices, just pale light through the slats in the shutters and the low creak of wood as the fire died down to embers. Calder stirred early, as always. His eyes opened slowly, instinct keeping his body still as he listened to the room. Two breaths, one steady, older, with a soft rasp every few seconds. The other lighter, closer, the kind that moved when someone shifted in their sleep. He sat up, swung his legs over the side of the bed, and rubbed his face with both hands. The air was still cold, not enough to bite, but enough to make you tighten your jaw. Sona was awake, sitting near the fire, legs folded under her, arms crossed over her knees. Her hair was loose now, draped over one shoulder. She wasn't looking at him, just staring into the ashes, motionless. He moved past her without a word, filled the kettle with water, and set it on the stove. She didn't look up, but he noticed how her eyes flicked toward the movement. "You sleep?" he asked. It came out low, gruff. He regretted how it sounded, but she didn't seem to take it wrong. She nodded once. Enough. Her voice was soft, with weight to it, like someone who measured every word before using it. Behind her, Adai still slept. Calder pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The air hit his skin sharp and clean. Snow had fallen overnight, just a dusting, but it made everything look different. Quiet. The ground was white, the pines were white. The world felt paused. He fed the chickens first, then checked the wood pile. It was running low. Another day or two and he'd have to cut more. He went to the corral. Slate was fine. The mule nudged his chest, looking for treats, but Calder gave him a firm pat and turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the kettle hissed. Sona had poured water into tin cups and set them on the table. She was standing now, smoothing the blanket over her mother's sleeping form. Her dress, still the same tattered one from yesterday, was pulled tighter around her waist with a leather string. But it didn't hide much. Her curves were clear beneath the thin hide. Her neckline drooped low on one side, exposing part of her shoulder and the top swell of her chest. She didn't pull it up, didn't explain. Calder looked away and sat. She sat across from him. They drank in silence. Then she asked, "Do you want us gone?" The question didn't surprise him. What did was the way she asked it, without fear, just clarity, like she was used to being sent away and didn't see much point in dragging it out. "No," he said. It was the truth. Her shoulders eased slightly. Not much, but he saw it. "You got somewhere else to go?" he asked. Sona shook her head. Calder waited. He didn't push. She didn't explain her exile or why they had no family or what her tribe had done. But the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt honest. Adai stirred then, coughing weakly. Sona moved to her side, brought her water, and helped her sit up. Calder watched the way she tended to her mother. Gentle, practiced. Not many young women would know how to care for someone who was already fading, but Sona did. She moved like she'd been doing it a long time. Later, Calder cleared space in a shed out back. It was small, but with a little work, it could serve as a place for them to sleep if they stayed. He didn't say it out loud. He just started clearing it. Sona helped without being asked, carrying out old tools, stacking boxes. Her strength surprised him. She didn't complain once, didn't ask for rest. She worked until her hands were pink from the cold. At one point, she stopped to catch her breath, leaning against the wall. Calder noticed a thin bruise on her collarbone, dark against her bronze skin. He didn't ask, but it stayed in his mind. That evening, after chores were done and the stew was warming again, he finally asked what had been sitting in the back of his thoughts since yesterday. Why they cast you out? Sona didn't answer right away. She looked into the fire again, fingers wrapped around her cup. They said I brought shame, she said. He waited. They didn't like how men looked at me. Said I was a curse, a temptation. Her voice didn't crack. She didn't cry, but he could hear something raw under the words. Something tired, worn down from years of being punished for the shape of her own body. I didn't ask for any of it, she added. Calder looked at her for a long moment. She didn't meet his eyes, but she wasn't hiding either. I believe you, I said, I do believe you, he said, and he meant it. She finally looked at him, and for the first time since she arrived, her expression shifted. Not a smile, but something close to it. The muscles around her mouth softened. Her eyes no longer held the same tension. She nodded once, then said, we can help around here if you let us. He gave a quiet grunt. I ain't stopping you. That was enough. That night, Sona stayed near the hearth again, curled beside her mother. But Calder noticed the difference. She wasn't braced like before. Her breathing was slower, her shoulders relaxed. She was still alert, but something had shifted. She felt safe. He lay awake a while longer, watching the firelight play on the wooden walls. His cabin hadn't felt like much of a home in years, but now there were two women sleeping on his floor, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The days passed quietly after that, but they weren't uneventful. Winter deepened, bringing snow that clung stubbornly to the cabin roof and turned the ground to frozen clay. Calder worked through it as always, hauling chopped wood, checking traps, repairing the chicken coop when the wind cracked one of the boards loose. But now he wasn't alone in his routines. That simple fact still sat strangely with him, like a weight he wasn't sure he wanted to set down. Sona moved with purpose each day. She swept the floors, fetched water from the creek with numb hands, and mended clothes with torn threads she kept in a bundle wrapped inside old deerskin. She didn't talk much, but she didn't avoid him either. They'd speak in passing, short things. Water's boiling, hens are fed, traps empty. But the weight wasn't in the words. It was in how they looked at each other now. One morning, Calder caught her standing at the shed door, watching Slate chew hay in the corral. The light fell across her shoulders just right. He noticed how the fabric of her dress had worn thinner, how the neckline dipped lower than before. A tear near the collar had widened, showing more of her chest than she probably realized. Her skin was smooth, the rise of her breast visible from the side as she leaned forward. He looked away quickly, jaw tightening. She turned slightly and caught him watching. He expected her to adjust the dress or cover herself, maybe even glare, but she didn't. She just looked at him, calm, still, then turned back to the mule. That night, they ate stew together at the table instead of separately. Sona's mother, Adakishai, had grown weaker. Her cough deepened, and her hands trembled when she brought a spoon to her mouth. Sona stayed close to her throughout the evening, feeding her, keeping a damp cloth at her lips. Calder cleaned up the dishes, watching them from the stove. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with the feeling that had begun creeping into his chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something else, familiar, dangerous. The want to keep something close, the fear of what it would cost. Later that night, Sona stepped outside to shake out the blankets. Calder followed her, his coat on, boots crunching through snow. The moon was half hidden, but the yard was lit just enough. She didn't turn when he approached. She's not doing well, he said. No, Sona replied. She's not. He nodded, hands in his coat pockets. You got anyone else? No. Her voice was firm. They made sure of that. Your tribe? Gone to us, she said simply. They feared how men looked at me, said I'd bring ruin, said my mother encouraged it. Calder glanced at her. She didn't. No, but it didn't matter. There was bitterness there, but it was old, settled. He looked at her again, her bare feet in the snow, her arms crossed, the dress clinging to her body. He took off his coat and handed it to her. She looked at it, then at him. For a moment she didn't move. Then she took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're not like them," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't trust himself to. She stepped closer to him. "I know what men see," she said, "and I know what you don't say." His throat tightened. "I've been treated like something to own," she continued, "but you haven't done that." "I don't want to," he said. "I know." They stood in silence after that. She didn't step back, and he didn't walk away. Inside, Adai was asleep near the fire. Sona laid the coat near the chair and sat beside her mother, brushing her fingers along the older woman's forehead. Calder watched from across the room, not saying anything. Later, as he moved to stoke the fire, Sona approached him. Her hand grazed his arm just briefly. "Thank you," she said. He looked down at her. Their eyes met, and for a long second, neither moved. Then, without warning, she leaned in and pressed her lips against his cheek. Not rushed, not forced, just warm. Calder didn't move. She didn't say anything after. She just turned and returned to her blanket by the hearth, curling up beside her mother. He stood there for a while, staring into the flames. His hand slowly came up to touch the place where her lips had been, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty. He fell awake. The sun broke over the ridge without warmth, casting a weak orange light across the pine tops. Inside the cabin, it was still dim. Calder woke to the sound of a soft cough, dry and shallow. He lay still for a moment, listening. Sona's mother. He rose, pulling on his boots without tying them, and stepped into the main room. The fire had died down to faint coals. The air had chilled overnight. Sona was already up, crouched beside Adai, holding a cloth to her mother's lips, whispering something low. Calder couldn't make out the words, but her tone was patient, careful. More daughter than caretaker now. Adai looked worse. Her cheeks hollowed, skin papery, the whites of her eyes faintly yellow. Calder recognized the signs. He'd seen them before. There wasn't much time left. Sona looked up at Gaysim when she noticed he was standing nearby. Her expression didn't change, but there was something exhausted in her eyes, more than from just broken sleep. Calder cleared his throat gently. "I'll heat water." He lit the stove, poured what was left from the bucket, and added more from the outside barrel. The silence between them wasn't heavy, it was needed. Sona returned to her mother's side, whispering again in her native tongue. After breakfast, Calder stepped out to chop wood. Sona followed without saying anything, grabbing the kindling basket and gathering fallen branches nearby, her breath misting in front of her face. She moved slower than usual, tired but steady. They worked without speaking for some time, then Calder asked, "You ever lived with a man before?" Sona paused but didn't look at him. "No," he nodded slowly. "You afraid I'll start expecting things?" She finally turned, her face blank, unreadable. "No, if you wanted something, you'd have tried by now." He lowered the axe. "I don't want anything you don't give," he said. Sona met his eyes. "I know." She returned to gathering wood. Calder stood there a moment, unsure why he'd even asked. Maybe to clear the air. Maybe to tell her he wasn't the kind of man her past had taught her to expect. Maybe just to feel like he was doing something right. When they returned to the cabin, Adai was sitting upright, though barely. Her voice had gone raspy. Sona helped her sip from a tin cup and rubbed her back when the coughing started again. Calder set the wood down and stood quietly by the door. Then Adai lifted her hand and pointed at him. "You," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. "Come here." Calder walked to her side. "You're quiet," she said. He nodded once. "That's good," she continued. "Men who talk too much do nothing." Sona looked surprised at the sudden energy in her mother's voice. Adai stared hard at Calder. "You'll bury me soon." He looked down, didn't respond. "She'll be alone." Sona reached for her mother's hand. "Don't." "No," Adai cut her off, still watching Calder. "She's strong, but she don't know how to stop surviving." Calder swallowed. "She won't be alone." The old woman nodded once, satisfied. That night, Adai slept lightly, fading in and out. Sona never left her side. Calder sat in his chair, watching the fire, unable to sleep. The silence in the room was different now, thicker, full of waiting. In the middle of the night, Calder stirred from half-sleep to the sound of quiet sobbing. He looked over and saw Sona curled beside her mother, one hand clutched around her mother's fingers, her shoulders trembling. The firelight caught the wet on her cheekbones. He stood slowly, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just rested a hand on her back. She didn't pull away. "She's not gone yet," he said quietly. Sona nodded against her forearm, then turned, pressed her forehead to Calder's shoulder, and let herself cry. It wasn't loud, wasn't wild. It was the kind of grief that came after too long holding everything inside. Calder held her, not like a man claiming something, not like a man needing something, just like someone who knew what it meant to lose. In the quiet, he whispered, "I'm here." For the first time since she arrived, she let herself lean into that. The morning air was heavy, not with cold, though the frost still clung to the edges of the windows, but with the stillness of waiting. Calder knew before he even sat up. He could feel it, the kind of quiet that filled the space after something ends. He rose slowly, pulling on his shirt and boots. The fire had burned down low. He crossed the room, careful not to let the boards creak, and looked toward the hearth. Sona was kneeling beside her mother, unmoving. Adai lay still, her hand resting gently on her chest, lips parted slightly, eyes closed, as if she'd simply drifted off. A calm expression sat on her face that hadn't been there the night before. Calder didn't speak. Sona didn't cry. She just brushed a strand of gray hair from her mother's face and leaned forward to press her forehead to Adai's. She stayed that way a long time. Eventually, she sat back and looked up at him, her eyes red but dry. "She's gone." He nodded once. "She went easy," Sona added. "Didn't wake." "I'm sorry," he said. She gave the faintest nod, then stood and went to the wash basin without a word. Soaking a cloth and wringing it out, she began wiping Adai's hands, her face, moving slowly, carefully, like she was performing a ritual she prepared for since the first cough. Calder didn't interrupt. He went outside and dug. The ground was hard but not frozen through. He worked with the focus of someone who knew the value of keeping his mind still. The sun climbed higher. He peeled off his coat, then his outer shirt. Sweat clung to his back despite the cold. His breath fogged with every exhale. By midday, the grave was done. He returned to the cabin. Sona had dressed her mother in a clean deerskin wrap and wrapped a shawl over her shoulders. She had braided the old woman's hair and tied it with a piece of leather. "I'll carry her," Calder said. Sona didn't argue. He lifted Adai's body gently, carried her through the trees, and laid her down inside the shallow earth. There were no words spoken over the grave, no preacher, no prayers. Sona knelt in the snow beside it. After a long silence, she whispered something in Apache, too soft for him to catch. Then she stood and let him begin to cover the body. It was done in minutes. When he pressed the final mound down, Calder stood back, his chest rising slowly. Sona remained still, staring at the ground, her arms crossed over her stomach. "She loved you," Calder said quietly. Sona didn't answer, but her chin trembled just once before she tightened it again. They walked back in silence. That night, the cabin felt smaller. Not colder, but emptier. Calder made sure the fire burned high. Sona sat in Calder's armchair chair near the hearth, one leg tucked under her, her arms around a mug of warm water. She wore one of his shirts now, loose across her chest and shoulders, the sleeves rolled up. The collar had fallen low across her chest, revealing a hint of cleavage in the slope of her collarbone. But she didn't seem to care anymore. Maybe she didn't notice. Maybe she did and didn't feel the need to hide. Calder didn't look away this time. She glanced at him, her voice quiet. "She always told me not to become hard, even after everything." "You're not," he said. "You don't know me." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I know what I see." She studied him for a long moment. "Then what do you see?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "I see a woman who's been blamed for things she didn't ask for, who kept her mother alive long after most would have given up, who does more than speak." Sona didn't move, but something in her face shifted. Her eyes softened. Calder stepped closer. "She told me you didn't know how to stop surviving." "I don't." "You don't have to," he said. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." The space between them tightened. Sona set her mug down on the small table. Her bare feet stepped across the wooden floor, slow and quiet, until she stood in front of him. He didn't move. Her voice came out soft but steady. If I stay, you need to understand something. I'm listening. I'm not broken. I'm tired. There's a difference. He nodded. I know. Her fingers touched his chest, light just above his heart. Her other hand rested at his side. I don't want saving. I just want to stop running. His hand came up, settling gently on her waist. You already did, he said. She leaned up then, slowly, and kissed him. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was a kiss made from shared silence, from long days of unspoken looks and small acts of care. His hand slid up her back. Her fingers touched his jaw. Her body pressed lightly against his, and still, neither of them pushed for more. When she pulled back, her breath was unsteady. I'll sleep in your bed tonight, she said, but only to rest. He nodded. That's enough. They lay side by side under one blanket, her head against his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on his chest. Her breathing slowed, his heartbeat calmed, and they slept. Not as strangers, not as lovers, just as two people who had decided finally not to be alone. The cabin was still when Calder woke. The morning light barely crept through the shutters, casting a dull gray across the room. His eyes adjusted slowly. The fire had burned low again, but the heat lingered. Beside him, Sona was curled on her side, one hand resting on his chest, her breath steady and warm against his ribs. Her long, dark hair had fallen loose in the night, spread across the blanket and over his arm. She looked calm, peaceful, and for a moment Calder didn't move. He just lay there, letting himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Ease. It was the first morning in a long time that didn't begin with dread. He moved slowly, easing out from beneath the blanket without waking her. She stirred slightly, but didn't open her eyes. He pulled on his shirt, his coat, and stepped outside into the cold. The snow had stopped overnight, but the sky was still heavy, low with clouds. He fed the chickens, checked on the mule, then split more wood. Chores helped keep his hands busy, his mind clear, but nothing dulled the fact that everything had changed. Inside, Sona had stirred. She moved about quietly, heating water, folding blankets, sweeping near the hearth. When Calder returned, she was kneeling by the fire, her hair tied back again, wearing the same shirt of his from the night before, now half-buttoned, loose enough to fall off one shoulder. The top of her chest was visible again, heel and soft, her curves accentuated by how little fabric clung to her waist. She didn't bother adjusting it. She looked up at him. You sleep all right? He asked. Sona nodded. First time in a while. Calder sat at the table. She brought over 2 cups and poured the water. I keep thinking I'll wake up and she'll still be here, she said. Then I remember. He nodded. It don't feel real right away. No. They sat in quiet again, but it wasn't awkward. It was just real. Then Sona looked over at Em with something more direct in her gaze. You never asked why I came out from the trees that day. Why I didn't run. I figured it wasn't my place. I stayed hidden until my mother told me to come out, she said. But I was already watching you from the minute you picked up her pack. Calder listened without interrupting. She told me later what she saw in you, but I saw it first. You didn't speak unless needed. You didn't touch her without care. You walked beside her, not ahead or behind. That's why I came out. Calder shifted slightly, absorbing the weight of what she said. I didn't know what I'd find when I left the trees, she continued, but I was ready to run if you were like the others. I'm not, he said. I know, you had pain too. He met her eyes. Enough. She stood then, walked to the window, arms crossed. Will they come looking for me? He knew what she meant. Her tribe? Maybe, he said, but I doubt it. People like that don't look back. She didn't answer. But if they do, he added, they'll find I don't scare easy. That made her turn. There was a flicker of something in her expression. Appreciation, maybe trust, maybe more. You really want me here? She asked. Even now? He stood slowly. I didn't ask you to stay out of pity. She nodded, took a breath, Then I want to do more than cook and clean. I want to be part of it. The fence needs mending. The coop roof's crooked. I can handle a hammer. Calder gave a faint smile. All right. She stepped toward him again. Her voice softened. I want to build something, Calder. Not just survive inside your walls. I want to stay and work and maybe belong. He looked down at her. She was close again. So close, the heat from her body reached him before her hands touched his. Her fingers ran slowly up his chest. Her breath was steady now, but her voice was low. I'm still tired, but I want more than sleep tonight. Calder's hand came to her waist, his grip firm, but careful. You sure? Sona looked up at him, eyes dark and steady. I've been sure since I watched you carry her through the cold. Their lips met again, this time slower, deeper. His hands slid up her back. Her fingers gripped his shoulder. She pressed against him fully now, her chest to his, the soft shape of her curves molding to the lines of his body. The shirt she wore shifted, one button loosening. He kissed her neck just beneath her jaw. She tilted her head, inviting more. When they paused, both breathing heavier, she rested her forehead to his. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered. You never should be, he said. They stayed there a long time, wrapped in warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. No words were spoken after that. Just two people who had seen enough of the world to know this. Whatever it was meant something, and neither of them was going to let it slip away. By late winter, the snow started to let up. The days were still short, but the air softened just enough to melt the top layer of frost by midday. Life settled into a rhythm, not rushed, not spoken aloud, but clear in its pattern. Calder and Sona shared the work now. They moved through each day like a pair of old hands, quiet, coordinated, efficient. He'd pass her tools before she asked. She'd leave a shirt folded on the chair without a word. When she cooked, he chopped wood without needing to be told. It wasn't discussed, this partnership. They just did it. But not everything was settled. Sona hadn't mentioned marriage. Calder hadn't asked. Yet she was in his bed every night now, her body curled into his, her hand resting on his chest like it belonged there. Sometimes they lay in silence. Sometimes she would reach for him in the dark, and he'd respond with his hand sliding up the back of her thigh, with his lips at the base of her neck, with a kind of quiet need that didn't need names. One morning she woke before him, standing by the stove with her back to the fire. She wore the same shirt again, half-buttoned, falling off one shoulder. Calder stirred from the bed, watching her in the low light. Her legs were bare, her curves visible in the outline of the cotton and firelight. She turned when she felt him watching. He sat up slowly. You all right? I had a dream, she said, about my mother. He nodded, waiting. She was smiling, she said. Not warning, not tired, just smiling. She was proud of you, he said. Sona looked down for a moment, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. You think so? I know so. Later that day, while mending a fence at the edge of the property, Calder caught sight of her kneeling in the dirt, hammering nails into a loose board on the chicken coop. Her long hair was tied back with a leather strap. The cold had flushed her cheeks. When she stood wiping her hands on her skirt, he saw it again. The way she moved now, not like someone surviving, like someone staying. That evening, he cooked while she rested on the bed, arms behind her head, hair spread out over the pillow. She watched him closely. He could feel her gaze on his back. You're different now, she said. He glanced over. How's that? You don't flinch when I talk about staying. Calder turned slowly. I stopped thinking you'd leave. Sona sat up. I won't. He nodded, then, after a pause, asked, You ever think about having a child? She blinked once. The question had come out rougher than he'd meant, not demanding, just raw. I do, she said softly. But I never thought I'd have the choice. You do now. She rose from the bed and crossed to him. I want to stay here, she said. I want to build a life with you. I want to plant something in the spring, raise animals, maybe raise a child if it happens. But I want it because we choose it, not because we're desperate. He stepped closer. It won't be perfect. I don't know how to be a husband, not the proper way. I don't need proper, she said. I just need someone who stays. He nodded once, then kissed her. This time it wasn't tentative. It wasn't slow. His hands gripped her waist, pulled her close. Her body molded to his, soft, warm, willing. She kissed him back with heat and urgency. Her shirt slipped off one shoulder, then the other. His hands moved over her back, her thighs, up her sides. Her breath hitched when he lifted her off the floor and carried her to the bed. There were no words after that, only breath, only closeness, only the warmth of skin on skin in the middle of winter, in a place where neither of them had ever expected to be wanted, let alone loved. Later, as she lay in his arms, chest rising and falling slowly, she whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." Calder pressed his lips to her hair. "You never had to be." In the quiet, something finally settled between them, something real, not ownership, not obligation, but belonging. The snow melted early that year. By spring, the path behind the cabin had turned to soft mud, and the first green shoots pushed up along the edge of the creek. The air still carried a bite in the mornings, but by noon the sun lingered longer over the ridge. The cabin that once echoed with emptiness now felt full, even in its silence. Calder and Sona worked side by side. They'd started clearing the southern edge of the property to prep a small garden patch. She'd chosen the spot where the light touched longest and marked the lines with the stick. Calder let her. She didn't need permission. In the evenings they sat by the fire. She mended shirts while he whittled scrap wood into quiet shapes. A carved fox, a small bird, a woman's face, half finished, that he hadn't touched in days. Sona sometimes laid her head in his lap after supper, her fingers curling in the fabric of his shirt as he stroked her hair. Her body was familiar now, her scent, her warmth, the rise and fall of her breath against him. But what surprised Calder most wasn't the closeness. It was how easy it was to let her in and how much he needed it. One morning she came in from the creek, her boots damp, hair a little windblown. Calder stood by the stove, frying eggs in the skillet. She looked at him quietly for a moment, then said, "I need to tell you something." He turned, concern flickering across his face. She stepped closer. "I think I'm with child." The words didn't echo. They landed softly, solid, and full. Calder blinked. "You're sure?" "Not yet, but I feel different. And I know my body." He set the spatula down, drying his hands slowly on a rag. She kept her eyes on him, as if bracing for something. He didn't speak right away. He crossed the room to her, placed his hands gently at her waist, then let one slide to her lower stomach, resting there steady. Her voice softened. "I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it." "I'm not scared," he said. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Do you want this?" she asked. "I want you," he said, "whatever comes with you." She leaned into his chest, arms wrapping around him tightly. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing, holding on as something wordless passed between them. That afternoon, Calder rode into the nearest town for supplies. It was the first time he'd gone alone since Sona arrived. He took Slate, filled the cart with flour, seed, and a new kettle. When he returned, Sona was waiting on the porch, arms crossed under her chest, one foot bare, the other tapping in the dirt. She smiled when she saw him, small, tired, real. That evening, he opened a drawer and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a thin silver ring, plain, no stone, but shaped carefully, polished smooth. "I made it years ago," he said, "for someone who never wore it." Sona looked at it, then at him. "I'm not asking for ceremony," he said, "or preacher or papers. Just let's stop pretending we're not already each other's." She didn't speak. She took the ring, slid it onto her finger, and nodded once. "I'm already yours," she said. That night, they lay under one blanket again, her hand resting over his heart, his hand lying over her belly. No words passed between them. There didn't need to be. Come spring, the garden grew. By summer, Sona's belly had rounded beneath her dresses, and Calder added a second rocking chair to the porch. He built a small cradle by hand. She painted the wood. No one came looking for her. No tribe, no threats, just silence and space and time. Sometimes, when the evenings grew warm, they'd sit side by side outside, watching the light turn gold over the hills. Calder would rest a hand on her knee, Sona would lean her head on his shoulder, and they would stay that way. Two people who had once been forgotten by the world, now building something that would last. The story of Calder and Sona imparts a profound life lesson. True belonging is forged through mutual respect and the courage to choose connection over isolation, even in the face of loss and judgment. Calder, a man hardened by the death of his fiancée, finds an Apache woman, Adai, near death, and, through her, meets Sona, a young woman cast out for her beauty and strength. Despite his years of solitude, Calder opens his cabin and his heart, not out of pity, but from a shared understanding of pain and resilience. Sona, burdened by a past of blame and exile, finds in Calder a partner who sees her not as a curse, but as a woman capable of building a life. Their bond, deepened by shared grief over Adai's death and solidified through quiet acts of care, teaches us that love and family are choices we make, not obligations we inherit. It reminds us to look beyond societal prejudice, to offer shelter to those in need, and to embrace the vulnerability of starting anew. This tale resonates with raw emotion, urging us to reflect on the moments we've chosen to stay for someone, or when someone stayed for us, creating a home where none existed before. What does this story stir in your heart? Have you ever found unexpected connection in a moment of hardship? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your experiences. If this story moved you, please subscribe and join our community for more tales of resilience and hope. Let's keep the conversation alive and build something lasting together.